Welcome to Previously on X-Men, the podcast that looks back on X-Men comics, movies, shows, characters, and more. You can find more about this show and others like it at our network's website, radiomeanwhile.com, where we have a forum for you to share your thoughts on this and upcoming episodes. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Previously on X, and please rate, subscribe, and share this show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. I'm Eric Mickles, known online as Dusk vs. Tweak, and with me is...
Hilary Gunning.
And today, we're talking about the 2000 film X-Men.
Yeah, we are.
No subtitles, just X-Men.
Just X-Men.
Actually,
simplicity itself.
X-Men 2 is the only one that ever has a number.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it's barely that. It's X2.
X2, yeah.
X-Men United. It's a rough...
Honestly,
it's a rough name.
I don't know if I remembered the subtitle.
Nobody really does. It was a weird naming system. An X-Men movie was in talks since the 1980s, going through multiple channels until Fox bought the rights in 1994, based off of the success they were having with the 90s animated series. You remember the 90s animated series?
I do.
We talked about that.
Yes.
X-Men. Which sort of makes the X-Men, the first X-Men movie at least, kind of a live-action adaptation of the cartoon in some ways.
Really?
A little bit. I mean...
In
that a lot of fans were probably coming to the first movie having only watched the cartoon.
Yeah.
And it inspired Fox to get the script together. And Bryan Singer and some of the actors had to watch the cartoons.
Really?
I believe Singer said he watched the whole series. And...
So why did they end up making the main character Rogue without her powers? If they're coming straight from the 90s cartoon.
I don't know. I wasn't... In 1998 when they were making this movie...
Where were you, Eric?
I was thinking the Matthew Broderick Godzilla was good.
Oh, man.
Yeah, well, it was 98. I had nothing to prove. The 1980s, when they would have been getting the movies together, this would have been when the X-Men, like, post Dark Phoenix, post Days of Future Past, this would have been, like, the X-Men in Australia and everything. This would have been, like, a very
You're talking about during the comics?
During the comics.
Okay.
This would have been very high in terms of popularity for the X-Men comics, but still not them becoming the highest selling comics of all time, like early 90s X-Men. So I think it was just impressive that they were, as we talked about with the Giant Size X-Men episode, they were almost canceled.
Yeah.
And now they were becoming Marvel's most successful comics in the world. Throughout the 80s and 90s, a couple of names were involved with making an X-Men movie happening. James Cameron was one of the names. No. But he was also attached with Spider-Man, where...
Why?
A lot of people...
Okay, so James Cameron did Titanic.
Well...
What else did he do? Like, what was he known for around this time?
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, if it's the 80s, he's coming off of Terminator and Aliens.
Okay, all right.
And if it's the 90s, he's coming off of Terminator. If it's especially after the cartoon, he's coming off of Terminator 2.
All right, I
and
guess
before
that makes
Titanic.
sense.
Maybe True Lies?
The only thing I think about now, it's his own stupid fault. The only thing I think
Avatar.
about is Avatar.
Yeah.
When I hear
he's not coming off of Avatar for the X-Men.
He's not
movies,
coming up.
I think it's the 90s he was involved with trying to make a Spider-Man movie happen.
Okay.
With a lot of people always make mock posters of like a young DiCaprio in the Spider-Man costume. And so 97, I mean that's
complete wrong
yeah.
attitude.
Fox ended up hiring Bryan Singer due to the success of Usual Suspects. Have you seen that movie?
I feel like yes, but I don't know.
It's an interesting movie. It's an ensemble picture. And I think that was one of the strengths about it. In the film for X-Men, settled on a script that was a combination of Bryan Singer, Tom DeSanto, and David Hayter. Other people had written scripts before. Michael Chabon, do you recognize that name?
Oh yeah, he's an author, isn't he?
He's an author. He won the Hugo. There were scripts involving like Jubilee and Wolverine just hanging out, and then the second movie would deal with villains.
So they were planning on multiple movies?
So if this is in the early 90s, you're looking at the Batman franchise as the most obvious. Superman, the franchise was dead. The Batman franchise was going as strong as it can with Batman Returns and Forever. So yeah, I think they would be planning on.
Yeah, they were thinking it would be...
It wasn't totally the franchise game like it is now.
Right, yeah.
There were other scripts that had Wolverine.
There was the one with Joss Whedon did a script.
Joss Whedon did a script.
Started a script?
I think he did a script and they passed because it was too heavy on pop culture references.
That doesn't sound like him at all.
There was a script where Wolverine met the original X-Men. He just showed up. I don't know how.
With the hoods and everything?
Well, yeah, the 1960s team lineup.
Iceman
and Angel. So he would have arrived and they would have fought Magneto and I think the Brotherhood and also the Sentinels. So a lot of times
straight classic.
It was a lot. When you read stuff, it almost reads like it's overstuffed, like they didn't realize how much it was all going to cost. But also in the 90s, who knows what like Sentinels would have looked like.
That's true.
So, and the previous scripts included Nightcrawler, Beast, Angel, Juggernaut, Blob, and the Sentinels, all who were written out for various reasons. Many times they were just written out due to budget, but all those characters would show up later in sequels. So
Yeah, once they kind of laid the groundwork.
Yep. And Beast got cut. Beast and Angel got cut like two movies in a row. They were both supposed to show up in X-Men 2. Basically, the really effects heavy.
Yeah.
In fact, Nightcrawler was scheduled to be, not scheduled, but was planned to be in the first X-Men movie.
Yeah.
Right up until Fox limited their budget to $75 million.
Well, I think it's a good idea for them to start simpler. I mean, they go for such a straight, like, real life tone. I think it's a good idea to not go quite so colorful with all the crazy looking mutants right off the bat.
We dodged some bullets. Brett Ratner was considered to direct the first movie before he made the third movie. And Paul W.S. Anderson was also offered the position, but he turned it down because he wanted to do more R-rated movies.
I do not know who that is.
He did Mortal Kombat, the movie. They would not have been good. So
certainly different.
Yeah. So Fox had projected at like 75 millions for their budget. That's how, I think there was like a couple of million were cut. And so even the Danger Room was supposed to show up and was axed.
I love the Danger Room.
Yeah. Let's talk about who they were casting.
This is such a good cast. It's half of a really great cast and half of a
We'll start boring. Xavier was always Patrick Stewart.
Everyone who has ever known Xavier and Patrick Stewart has known that this would happen someday.
He was offered Richard Donner, who directed, I believe he directed Superman, but he was also involved. I don't know if he directed Conspiracy Theory because I don't have it in my notes here.
Oh, that sounds right.
Patrick Stewart was offered the role on the set of Conspiracy Theory.
Really? Mm-hmm. Do you think it was pre or post Nosebite?
Yeah, that's a gruesome scene. If you read Wizard magazine, they always did casting calls, and a lot of stuff, it was always ridiculous. Like, this person would never be in this type of movie. But it was always Patrick Stewart. Every time they did X-Men,
I think secretly, Patrick Stewart is Charles Xavier.
Yeah. Well, did you ever see, you've probably read, or at least seen the X-Men Next Gen crossover novel.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you have Picard and Xavier on the same cover. It's like, oh.
But do you ever see them at the same time?
No.
Hang on, I gotta wheel out of this room.
What's great about Patrick Stewart is that he also just, anytime they're like, hey, we need a voice for Xavier, he's like, I'll do it. So he's in all the video games,
He will do it. He owns characters, you know?
Yeah.
Like, he's not gonna let some rando do the
That's
voice.
true. All right, so Wolverine was, I mean, every script treatment you read about, Wolverine's always there. So Wolverine was the most popular character in the 80s and in the 90s.
Why do you suppose that is?
I mean, he's just a man of mystery. This would be the time.
Yes, but as we discussed in our previous episode, that was not even intentional.
Yes,
they just didn't bother giving you a backstory.
If we're talking about the 80s and the 90s, then his backstory has been fleshed out in a mysterious way. We know he was part of the Weapon X program, maybe against his will, and that he's lost his memory. Maybe there's implanted memories.
Canadians.
We haven't gotten his full origin story told in the comics yet. His relationship with Sabretooth was still like, who are they to each other?
I prefer it that way.
Yes, there's a lot of stuff to be preferred with earlier Wolverine. And, I mean, he was just, even, like, Gambit, showed up and was also like, rules are for squares and I go my own way, but it still didn't really match Wolverine, because the thing is, Wolverine is very much, I make my own rules, also I have all the means to enforce that stance.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's just,
he can back it up.
Yeah, for a lot of people,
Gambit can back it up.
He can back it up, but also Gambit's very charming.
Yes,
and
that's
usually,
true.
And,
he goes a different tack.
And Wolverine isn't that.
Yeah.
Isn't that. He's very, I mean, at this time, too, he's probably very much like an 80s just action hero as well.
Yeah,
in
that makes sense.
So, and claws are just cool.
Are they?
Yes. Adamantium claws are cool. Yes.
Well, hang on. Let's take a second here.
Okay.
Are you a bone claws guy or a no bone claws?
I like that his claws are bones and that they
are covered in
adamantium.
I don't.
No.
I don't like it. I don't know why.
Weird.
But I feel very strongly about it.
Look, I believe it was our first episode where I talked about my big X-Men encyclopedia.
Uh-huh.
And I remember opening that up and finding out Wolverine's claws were bones, and I was like, what? Whoa! Casting of Wolverine.
Yeah.
Russell Crowe was offered the
my
movie,
word.
and he
Speaking of
turned it
SWAT.
down.
Although at the time he wasn't really, was he?
Squat?
Back then, now I'm this is so mean. Now I picture him as sort of like a
He's put on weight.
wide,
Yeah.
short
Yeah.
person.
Yes.
I don't imagine that is his intent.
Well, in 2000, when the first X-Men movie came out, Gladiator was coming out. So he was still very
Right.
much like a...
Yeah.
That's the way they were going. They wanted that rugged...
Well, like the standard Wolverine.
Yep. And he actually suggested Hugh Jackman.
Really?
Having worked with him or seen him in Oklahoma, I can't remember which it was, but he suggested...
Having seen him in Oklahoma,
That might have... Yeah.
he suggested that this man might work for Wolverine.
Yep.
Is what you're telling
Yeah.
me right now. Having seen him as Curly.
Yeah. And instead, they cast Dougray Scott. Dougray Scott was the villain in Mission Impossible 2.
Oh, yes.
And he was... the scheduling with Mission Impossible 2 started to conflict, and they had actually, he was cast and getting ready to film, but Mission Impossible 2 went long. He was injured in a motorcycle accident because there's a lot of motorcycles in Mission Impossible 2.
Motorcycle accidents.
So Hugh Jackman was cast 3 weeks into filming. And
Filming.
that means, yes, that's not he has 3 weeks to prepare for the role. They have shot X-Men 2000 for about 3 weeks now.
And then he stumbles onto
And
the
he's
set,
in there, yes.
pulling on his jacket.
So,
I'm here, you guys!
Yeah, they just have to keep picking scenes that do not have Wolverine, which is not a
I
lot
just
of
hope that they find
any
some
of the
guy.
X-Men movies.
Yeah. Well, good for Russell Crowe with the suggestion,
Yeah.
because this was some good casting.
That's why when you meet Wolverine for the first time in the cage fight and he's
Yeah.
shirtless, anytime you see Hugh Jackman
That's
shirtless,
such a good start for him.
he's
That pose is so good.
he's
Leaning
not
against the bars.
he's not ripped.
Yeah, you say that, but I don't know.
No,
He seems-
he's fit. He's a fit fella. He looks like a dad who works out. But
okay. Yeah. Okay.
he's not abs going from hip
You're
to
right.
neck.
It's not like the later
Yeah.
ones. They really
The
like,
Wolverine
focus on the
specifically,
muscles.
or Days of Future Past, he
Yeah.
even asked The Rock for workout.
Yeah, it's
So.
almost it's like a bulky kind
Yes.
of a muscle.
It makes sense that maybe he's not because Wolverine's not going to be doing push-ups.
Exactly. Like he doesn't
So.
seem like the type who would be like, I'm gonna
But
work on my body.
You could get away with the fact that his bones are so heavy with all the adamantium that just going throughout his day is a workout.
Yeah, right. But then it's just like his calf muscles.
Yeah, no,
are,
that's
like,
a nerd
through the
excuse.
roof.
Like, well, actually, his bones weigh so much that when
Yeah,
he
I
gets out of
pictured you
bed, it's a
pushing
push-up.
your little glasses up on your
Yep.
nose.
Cyclops, Jim Caviezel was cast as Cyclops, but had to drop out. He was in Frequency. He played the son in Frequency.
Oh yes, okay.
You might also know him as Jesus from Passion of the Christ.
I have not seen that.
He was in the Thin Red Line. He was another one that was cast, but then had to drop
like
out.
officially cast.
Yeah.
Why was no one sticking around for this movie?
He had a Frequency, scheduling conflicts on all these.
Frequency was very important.
Look, it's okay because James Marsden needed this, I think. I mean, I don't know what he was before
they
then.
both needed. They
Yeah.
needed each other.
Oh,
You know.
yeah.
He's one that I think is very good casting.
Yes, he is a very good and underused addition to the cast.
Definitely underused. He has a very good like essence that he brings to it because he got the Boy Scout thing,
Mm-hmm.
but he's also got. It's not an edge. It's like I don't know. It's just a right attitude that makes him
believe
still
that he
somehow
could-
likable.
You believe he could back up his Boy Scoutness if he
there's-
had to. When
yeah.
push comes to shove.
Yeah,
So
and he doesn't let Wolverine push him around.
yeah, and that's important. Angela Bassett was too expensive for Storm.
That would have been so much better.
Listen, Halle Berry's a great actress.
Is
But
she?
she's underused in the
I've
movies.
seen Catwoman.
Okay.
I've
She makes
seen
bad
this.
choices. In the
She's
first
a
movie,
big a nothing.
she's underused in this movie. Second movie she'll be better. Third movie she'll be a little bit too in control of the character. Natalie Portman turned down the role of Rogue,
That's a very similar type.
and Helen Hunt turned down the role of Jean Grey.
What?
Helen Hunt from
Helen Hunt as
Mad About
Jean-
You.
I know who Helen Hunt
Okay,
is.
from
I'm just
Twister.
saying, that is not the same type at all.
Well, she's got the nose. Famke Jensen and her have the same
whole
nose.
attitude is completely different in that she has one at all.
Yeah,
and isn't
yeah,
just a
Jean
blank
Grey-
slate of nothing.
Yeah, Jean Grey is a very dry character in these movies, and in comics in general.
All the women are duds. in this movie.
The ones I've pointed out here of turning down the roles, that's because a lot of people are, like, considered, air quotes.
Considered, like, their names were tossed
Their
around.
names are tossed around. How much that actually means anything. I mean, with Wolverine, Keanu Reeves, Mel Gibson, and Bob Hoskins were names that were connected to Wolverine.
Weird.
90s Keanu Reeves.
Still.
I mean, yeah, he's too young.
That's not right.
It might have, I mean, it could be in a different take where Wolverine's, like, in his 20s.
Wolverine's like, whoa.
Mel Gibson would have been
Guys.
very popular in, I guess this probably would have been in the 90s, so he was still an action star.
Yeah.
And Bob Hoskins, I think, was the 80s. Pretty sure if we're talking 80s, Bob Hoskins is just being cast because he's a short, gruff actor.
Okay, so they had a different idea
well,
than what
Wolverine,
they ended up with.
Wolverine in the comics is 5'3".
Yeah, it makes
So,
sense. It makes sense when they're
yeah.
panning it out, but not as it ended up.
Yeah. So, I think...
Yeah, it's funny how well Hugh Jackman sells that role, which is incredibly well, when he's completely wrong for the role.
Yep. He's Australian. He's like 6'3",
Although if you go with Pride of the X-Men,
which we will next week.
he is Australian for some reason.
Janet Jackson was considered for Storm.
Oh, that'd be interesting. I haven't seen her act. Does she act?
Janet Jackson?
Yeah.
Yeah, occasionally. She turned down Trinity, I believe.
Really?
Or she couldn't do Trinity for something.
From The Matrix?
From The Matrix. David Hemblem.
David Hasselhoff, you say?
No. David Hemblem. He was the voice of Magneto in the 90s show, and he was considered for the movie role.
Oh, that's
because
cool.
he was the right age, and I think he's a stage actor. So that would have been cool. Which is another reason why I feel like this movie is very much not just a comic book adaptation, but the cartoon adaptation.
Oh yeah, that's...
So the movie was planned for Christmas 2000, but was moved up to the summer, and they had to finish the film.
Oh, that's a good idea. This is not a Christmas movie. I mean, there's stuff in the winter, but it's a summer block.
But moving it up to the summer meant they had to film it 6 months ahead of schedule, which was expensive. It had a $75 million budget, but that was less than other big summer releases like Gladiator and Mission Impossible 2. John Williams turned down to score the film due to scheduling. I'm sure it was just scheduling.
That would have been a very different sound.
Yeah.
I love the soundtrack of this one.
John Ottman was planning on doing the soundtrack, but when the movie was pushed from Christmas to summer, he had to turn it down. And then Michael Kamen took on the job and scored scenes as they were finished. So he was just getting the dailies, I imagine.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yep. Yeah, and he has it's a very weird score at times. Not traditional.
Oh, yeah?
Not a traditional superhero. There's not like too many like themes.
It's funny because I didn't notice... I tried to notice it the last time I watched the movie for this podcast. And I didn't really notice it very much when I was watching the movie.
Yeah.
But we have the soundtrack and we listen to it, and it's stunning.
It's more of a traditional like sci-fi soundtrack than it is a traditional superhero soundtrack.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't feel there's not a lot of like battle, but it is kind of like evocative of like the world changing and
yeah, that works really well for this kind of movie because
technically
they're superheroes, but I think the sci-fi feel works really well for it.
They're not really. Well, I guess Storm and Cyclops, but a lot of them aren't just in costume until the very end of the movie. So, the movie was released on July 14th, 2000, and made $296 million worldwide.
Which is a lot.
Well, from what I understand, a movie needs to make twice as much to break even, and 3 times as much as budget to be a hit.
Okay.
So, $75 million against almost $300 million.
Okay.
That's about 300. Yeah, that's 3 times.
So, did great.
Yeah, it made about half of that, or a little less than half of that in the States. So it was one of those movies that if it came out now, it would be an absolute failure. But back then in 2000, it was a hit.
Nice.
So, Hilary, did you see this movie
Eric?
in the summer 2000?
I did. I saw it at the
theaters.
drive-thru. It was awesome.
Yeah?
I was so excited for this movie.
Were you? Because you were a fan of the cartoon.
Yeah.
Okay, so as
I
we
was, for like my entire thinking life, basically.
You would have been about 14 or 15
Yeah.
when this movie was coming out.
Oh wow, was I that young when the?
Yeah,
Wow.
we all were once. But you were excited for the movie.
I was.
Were you on
really
fan
excited.
sites?
Oh, I don't remember. Probably because I did that a lot with all of my various fandoms.
Right.
Probably. I don't.
Okay.
I don't remember learning about news and crap. But
I saw this movie in theaters. I would have seen it a little late, maybe in August or because I had been in summer camp when the movie was coming out. But as I said about when I was introduced to the X-Men, I was getting into X-Men as this movie was coming out. So I was reading Claremont comics.
Like in preparation for the movie. Right?
Yeah. I went to the official movie website. I spent a lot of time there.
I remember the official movie website.
They were in their costumes, and they would have a little...
It had... Before they did anything, they just had the website, and it was just the X.
Yeah.
And they didn't have anything else. And there was some effect on it that was really interesting. And I would check back constantly. Finally, they added the content and stuff.
Wait till we get to X-Men 2. I'm going to come across as pathetic.
I can't wait.
But I sat there, and I remember being on AIM talking to my friend about the website because they had the actors in costume, and they had little, infos about the characters. Like, her power is this, his power is this. And it was just because I was learning about the X-Men as this movie was happening, it was another piece of oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I remember looking at that and waiting, but I don't remember seeing very many trailers or anything leading up to the movie.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I just knew I wanted to go. I knew that year I was at summer camp. People had read the X-Men comics and were telling me things, and so I was, building up my excitement for that with the Claremont issues.
I don't rewatch things very much, and I've seen it several times.
Okay. It was just one of those movies that I would just be I'll just put it on and I'll get on my computer and do other stuff.
Yeah, that's not how I watch movies.
When this movie came out, do you remember desktop themes and how cool they were?
Yes, I do. So cool.
I had a pretty fantastic X-Men, the first movie, desktop theme that had all the cool... So when it started up, it would be somebody we are the future, Charles, not them. They no longer matter.
Nice.
And it would play the music. It was so cool.
Why isn't that a thing anymore?
I don't know. This is a movie that, as I'm watching it, I can just quote the movie along with it.
I probably could.
It's not a competition.
Let's and go.
Yeah. No, but more so than any of the other X-Men movies, and more so than better movies, or even movies I've watched more than the first X-Men movie.
Did you say better movies?
I'm sorry. Movie isn't a long one. It's only about an hour and 40 minutes. So it's very quick and to the point. It's dialogue that's meant to inform you of not just the character's stance, but the character's personality in general. So when Magneto's explaining how his machine that turns humans into mutants work, you're also learning about Magneto in general.
Yeah,
but it's also
what you would think about that
a lot of very one-liner kind of dialogue.
There's a lot in
Even
there.
if it's just conversational. It's very quippy. It's memorable. Yes, it's quotable.
They do it very well. I mean, it's very successful.
Yeah.
For something that is quippy and heavily expositional in characterization. Yeah. I mean, for cramming all of that into a script, it's very successful.
Well, I think they have a lot I think they owe some to Blade from 1998. The first Blade with Wesley Snipes, which brought the character in the comics of Blade was very, a little bit ridiculous, very blaxploitation in the 70s. And they made it a much more modern comic. They made it so that it was an action movie, Wesley Snipes movie first, comic book movie second. And kind of, I think, set the tone for us getting away from the Schumacher Batman films to what X-Men would now produce for the future.
To sort of place these extraordinary characters in an ordinary world.
Hyper-realistic, but still...
Hyper-realistic.
Yeah.
Very good
Thank you.
term.
It's X-Men sets the tone for almost every superhero movie that comes after it, in that this is a superhero in the real world, and there's ridiculousness in it, but this isn't a ridiculous movie.
Right.
Kind of set. You can't really have Spider-Man just in high school in a believable love story without the X-Men being we also go to a school and everything. And you don't get to Iron Man without the X-Men.
Yeah, it
in a lot of ways.
lays some really important groundwork.
It opens with Patrick Stewart's voice, as most things should.
All things start that way.
He's talking about mutation. He's explaining to the audience how mutation works.
Yes, which I view as necessary.
Yes.
And helpful, but I don't love it.
You don't love his narration?
I don't love it.
They come back.
It's a little, it almost contrived, but it would have to be because it's so informational.
Well, he's explaining mutation in general.
Yeah.
In case somebody coming into the theater is what does mutation mean? But then he's also saying, but every every couple of millennia or whatever, evolution takes a leap. So he's
a leap
saying, like,
forward,
not
yeah.
only is it something that takes millions of years, but boom, sometimes it just happens.
And pull this
Yes.
thing in the movie right now.
So they're kind of using mutation. It basically explains we're going to use mutation the same way Stan Lee intended when he wrote the comics, and that this is it. This is our piece of magic. Everything that's ridiculous in this movie is going to stem from this one thing about mutation. So accept it and get on board, and it'll be
Yeah.
much easier for everybody here.
Yeah, it's important that he does it.
Yeah, we get
for us to accept the movie.
we get a very like somber intro music as the like I said, kind of like sci-fi, as like we get that swirly whirly nothingness that kind of comes in a lot of other superhero movies later on. But then we open on the Holocaust in the rain.
Oh, it's such a good opening.
It is.
It's such a good opening.
And I like to imagine maybe like somebody came in 2 minutes late, missed Xavier speaking, and has no idea what film they're in.
Wait,
So
should I?
Yeah, because
I'm just gonna leave.
until the young Eric Lencher, until young Magneto starts bending steel,
It's like the very end of the scene.
it looks, you could just be like, oh, I'm in Schindler's List.
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, they just play it completely straight. The drama is perfect.
Yes.
It's beautiful. It's a beautifully done scene.
Yes.
It sets up the gravity of the kinds of situations we're going to be dealing with, where it's like a comic book movie, but we're starting with like this deeply traumatic social situation.
Right.
To really like be like, okay, so this is how heavy we're going.
Right, yeah.
With our social
Yep.
commentary.
Yeah. It does a lot of legwork in that it explains that mutants have been around for a while.
Yep.
Even maybe longer than the Holocaust, but we have mutants who are going to be as old as Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart. It explains that this isn't the real world, for the most part, and it explains right away why Magneto is going to do everything he does.
Oh yeah.
And you can't. I mean, they try, characters will argue like, oh, we got to be better than them and everything, but you can't be like, well, I don't know why Magneto's so mean.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's a
well,
very succinct character development moment.
Yes. And I think it's like the only way you can really explain. And this was an origin that was added to Magneto later on in the comics. But
I
think,
didn't know that.
Yeah, it wasn't. Well, I believe it was added when Chris Claremont was writing it.
It's so perfect.
Yeah.
It's so perfect as a backdrop for his whole spiel.
Yes, it is. And it also kind of says like, at that time, Batman and Robin would have been 3 years before this. And, I said that thing about Blade, but Blade is still a vampire movie.
Yeah.
And, this movie is, it's saying, no, we're different than that.
Well, it's perfect because this is the thing that makes the X-Men different.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the distinct thing. They're not just some team. They're not the Avengers.
Right.
They are characters in a world where they have to deal with this prejudice situation.
And they're gonna use it again. They're gonna come back to it in First Class. Magneto references needle touching his skin in Last Stand. Days of Future Past uses almost a similar opening, but in the future. And then we open up with Rogue, who's having her own mutant puberty moment.
Yeah.
So.
And that one really highlights the quietness.
That's true.
Of how these scenes start.
It bothers me he's not named Cody, the boy she kisses.
Yeah, they do that a couple times.
And Storm and Cyclops in the script originally had origin scenes where Storm was going to use her powers in her village, summoning Hailstorm I believe it was to defend her village, and Cyclops was going to be at a high school dance, be upset about a girl, and his eyes were going to explode, similar to the scene we see in Apocalypse.
Yeah.
So,
see, I think this was a really good choice to not do that.
Yeah.
I think having a couple of origins and then having these two, Storm and Cyclops, just appear, I think that gives it a really good turning
otherwise
point
it's just
movie.
origin after origin with
you
no
don't
context.
You don't need it.
And really, once you see Magneto, and he shows that mutation happens during moments of heightened stress, and you see Rogue, where they happen sometimes at puberty. And so it just kind of explains, like, these are two examples of how mutation works. They're extreme opposites.
Yeah.
We don't need to see the same thing happen with different characters. It was in the book, the novelization, which was very good. And we get to the Senate meeting? I don't know what kind of meeting this is. They're trying to pass a bill.
I think it's supposed to be she's presenting to the Senate. So
Yeah.
maybe like a committee.
Yeah, so Jean's there. I think she's supposed to be openly a mutant too. It's confusing who knows who is a mutant in this scene. This is I love the dialogue in it because even though Senator Kelly, who is an important character in the comics, and he was a big part of like season 1 in the animated series.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of forget because he's not in the comics anymore. He died in the comics back a little right after this movie came out. You kind of forget how important Senator Kelly is, but he's like in everything.
Well, he's just sort of he's a representative of like a movement.
Yeah, and I mean that's what he always was, and it's just good that like he's a fundamental part of like past X-Men history now, and that the movie has cemented that. But the thing is, he has that speech about how mutants are very real and they're among us, and we have to know who they are and what they can do.
Yeah,
and it's
we have to keep the tiny baby mutants out of our schools.
He's suggesting bad things, but he's suggesting it very convincingly.
He's very convincing, and it's bizarre because he takes it to a very extreme level.
I mean, you're right. He talks about things, but as viewers, we know this is real. When he says there are people who can walk through walls or go into our minds and remove our God-given free will, we know that's true.
Yep.
We know that those two examples are X-Men.
Yep.
But we also know there are cases of mutants that are going to cause problems. And
so we know that these specifics we're sympathetic to mutants because we are familiar
with the people,
with the
but he takes it out of context
and he's
just
not making completely insane points, even though he's clearly a bigot. Terrible person.
Right. But we also meet Xavier and Magneto for the first time.
Yeah, we do.
We see Xavier's the back of his head. He sees Magneto. They go out and
That's right when they say, isn't it right when
mutants are real. We have to know who they are.
They can control our thoughts, and then it's like.
And Xavier's all like, oh no.
This gentleman.
And they go out to the hallway and they have like one of the best exchanges those two characters are ever going to have.
Well, I mean, the two of them. I mean, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen are incredible in this movie.
That scene, it's just like the concentration camp scene in that it's just doing, and a lot of scenes in this movie do it, where it's doing heavy lifting for so many different moments. It's explaining to you Xavier's stance, because now this is our first time we're seeing him, about how he's looking for hope in someone we know is going to feel hopeless, because we just saw the Holocaust scene.
Right.
Him and Magneto are old friends. Magneto's been through this and has been probably patient throughout this situation, but also delivers like some pretty great dialogue. Yeah. So. Yeah,
and it's the script and it's the acting. Both of those things working together do all of that work. And it's not you see a lot of the relationship between the two of them in only the acting, I think. Yeah. Because like it's in there, like he calls him old friend and stuff, but you can feel that it's a long relationship. Yep. You can feel that there's love there. Yeah. There's disdain from Magneto. There's hope from. It's all coming from the acting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're both Shakespearean actors.
They're so good.
I don't know how much experience they had with each other, but since this movie, they've become like best friends.
Besties.
They just travel around and
awesome.
Take selfies with each other. I mean, it also probably helps that Patrick Stewart had all those years practicing in a chair. So he
walks around.
Yeah, I guess sometimes. We meet Rogue post kissing her boyfriend. So traveling the country, running away from home, like
her little hood.
Yeah, the truck driver that's driving Rogue is Beast from the cartoon.
That's cool.
Yeah, he's not playing up his like intellectual voice, his indubitably voice.
He's certainly not.
Yes. Rogue goes into the bar and there's a big cage match happening, and it's Hugh Jackman himself beating up on
the very
people.
Same.
Yes. Not using his claws because he's just got metal bones and that still hurts.
He's just using his toughness.
Yeah, and then,
that thing where he gets beat up for a minute and then he like meets the guy's fist with his fist.
Oh yeah,
it's awesome.
That's painful to think about. But yeah, like you were saying, we meet him in that like pose where he's just kind of like over it, having a smoke break.
Yep.
He's
just care.
Yeah, another day, another dollar.
Yeah,
and it is great because this is like that's like such an iconic way to meet a character for the first time. It's like, because everybody else is getting origins, and in other superhero movies they always get origins, so kind of the art of like meeting the hero as he's just doing stuff isn't something we do so much anymore, like you know, the I'm Batman scene or Blade walking into the nightclub and unleashing hell upon a bunch of vampires. Wolverine, we know that Wolverine's a loner from that. We know that he's a tough guy, can take a beating, but dish it out even better, and that he's a little grumpy.
He's a little grumpy. He has a cigar when he's in
Oh,
the
yeah,
cage.
yes, we know he's a smoker, too, which
Yeah.
they get to do. The cartoon could never do that. He was just like,
Yes.
you know. Whenever I showed this to people who hadn't seen it in theaters or in general, they might like be watching with a passive interest. The Magneto scene and Rogue scene maybe didn't really get it, or maybe they did and they kind of lost the plot as like Magneto and Xavier are talking. When Wolverine pops his claws for the first time against the guy's knife and shotgun,
Yeah.
and is just standing there. Everybody I've ever shown that to for the first time is just like stops.
That pose is so good when he starts
Yes.
with the one guy,
Yep.
and then the guy comes with the
Yeah.
shotgun and he flips
Yep,
around. And he's
yep.
got like,
and then he's got the two claws out and then brings out the middle claw to his neck.
You know, the CGI is really good there, I think.
Yeah.
I looked really closely because I remember in one of the later ones,
Origins.
his claws are the worst.
Yes.
The scene with when the claw is coming out of his
I think that's
skin.
practical.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that does it because it's great.
Yeah. Because you can see the skin tearing.
Yeah.
I believe that's practical. I could be wrong, but it looks very. If it's
Well,
if it's CGI, it is
very
impressive for 2000.
Yeah.
You're right. It's a great pose he's doing. That you can tell he's a dancer. The way he's like the way his like arms are stretched out and everything. But it's also like the claw. Like you said, the claws look good. He's in control of that situation. And
I love how he's observing everything too, because you see him doing the calculations in his head, where he's got the guy in front of him and he's got the guy behind him, but then he's also got Rogue over there that he's sort of had eye contact with.
She could get hurt.
Yeah.
If he.
So you just watch him process that whole thing.
It's important because Wolverine popping his claws can be a very like, oh, his claws are out again, kind of, in the cartoon. Sometimes he'll pop his claws, and then the scene will cut away and cut back, and then the claws come out again. And it's like he only retracts his claws to bring them back out for, like, a one-liner or something. So I think it's very important that they get Wolverine using his claws for the first time well.
Yeah.
It's kind of... Maybe this is too grandiose, but it's almost like when the Cantina in Star Wars, where Obi-Wan takes out his lightsaber for the first time.
Oh, yeah, it's a
and
similar
that
thing.
it's like, this is a cool weapon that not everybody has, and
Right.
it can do some serious damage.
Yeah.
So,
Well, like, we've already established him as cool and tough,
Yeah.
but now he also has retractable claws.
yep. And up until this part, up until what the next scene, this is where, when I was talking about the X-Men animated series and how I didn't understand what it was as a kid, and how I thought it was just a bunch of superheroes connected by name only, out in the world doing their own things, and sometimes they pass by each other.
Right. Which sounds awesome.
It feels like that in this movie, because it's just a bunch of characters
You're
just
just
doing...
seeing them all on their own.
And none of them are meeting. You don't know if they're going to meet.
Well, the cool thing about that is that, like, we know the X-Men are a team, but we also know, like you and I guess, people who know about this,
Right.
that mutants are everywhere. And so we're seeing these two...
we have to know who they are.
We're seeing these two primary X-Men characters living out these lives that lots and lots and lots of mutants all over the world live constantly.
Right.
Like, they don't have a nice home with the X-Men. They're just, like, trying to find places to be safe.
Yeah. Well, these two are good looking and have cool powers.
Yeah, so
so
they're
they get
okay.
an X-Men home.
What I like about the truck ride is it's another thing, another strength of Hugh Jackman. I think because of his weird dual personality of being super tough and super...
yeah.
When he's sitting there with Rogue, you just immediately get that he's got a soft spot, I guess.
Yeah, he's not
her.
a bad guy.
Like, you
but...
can just tell that he's gonna take care of her. Like, he's annoyed and he's gruff and stuff, but like, he's not. It would have been very easy, I think, for someone in that position to just be like, oh, whatever, fine, just sit over there, and then just stay rough.
Right.
But he just immediately is like, this is someone who's going to take care of her.
And we meet Sabretooth smashing trees at him and throwing him around.
That's such a good transition. Just having them have that conversation, and then having it have that sudden transition of, like, conversation, hitting a tree, launching through the thing. There's Wolverine. There's the X-Men in costume going nuts. It's
well,
such
this is the first time
contrast.
it's a superhero movie.
Yeah.
Because we've seen powers, but it's always been like horrible that we've seen powers, or just
it's sort of practical. Just like, I need to do this thing, and here I'm doing it.
And so
not showy at all.
Really, up until this moment, you could be like, so I guess this is just a character piece film, but now Sabretooth shows up and Cyclops and Storm show up in costume, using powers. The music swells and gets more exciting. You're like, oh, okay, it's a superhero movie.
Yeah.
I was worried. This scene, like, we see Wolverine smash through the glass and get up, and it's now, because we have to see Wolverine use his powers multiple times to understand all the ones he has.
Right, yeah.
We have to know he has metal bones, we have to know he has claws, and we have to know he has senses, and then we have to know he has a healing ability. And the healing ability is one that they keep showing throughout the series to lesser effect, I feel like. After a while, by Days of Future Past, we're like, we get it. Every cut he heals from. But at this time, it was like, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Because he was all gashed up, too.
It's really good, too, how he acts it.
Yeah.
Because he just is completely blasé about it. Like, he doesn't even notice. We're very fixated on the healing of the thing on his forehead. And she is, too. Rogue is in the truck. She's like, what's happening?
Yeah.
But he's just like, are you okay? Is everything fine?
I guess this is like the movie setting up a Sabretooth Wolverine rivalry, like in the comics and in the cartoon, that will not continue past this movie. No, which is, Sabretooth is one of the characters in this movie that I regret. I don't know. In general, I feel like it's just...
You regret him?
I regret their use of him, because to just have him as a henchman deprives the character of what makes him so lasting in the comics. And I mean, in the comics, he's one of these foes that can beat the crap out of Wolverine. That Wolverine, for a long time, just couldn't beat either.
Yeah.
That was a big deal, that Sabretooth would show up and just trounce Wolverine.
Yeah.
But also, Sabretooth represents... Like, we know Magneto is going to do bad things, but he's going to do bad things with semi-good intentions.
He's an intellectual. He's rational in a certain way. I mean, he's clearly... kind of crazy. He's twisted.
Magneto, yes.
But he's gonna think things through.
Right. But Sabretooth, in the he kind of represents like, okay, well, that's what happens when bad things happen to good people and they have powers. What happens when bad people, just like the real like the people that like the senators write about?
Yeah. People who are just bad.
And Sabretooth represents like, what happens if like a Ted Bundy serial killer had animalistic claws and was a powerful mutant? Like, that's an interesting thing. And in this, he's just kind of like, go punch something, Sabretooth. And they show scenes where he's not happy getting some of the orders he gets. He growls at Magneto every now and then.
Yeah, I like what they do with him in this movie. I think you're right that like as a broader character, they don't, flesh him out.
Right.
But I think they do really good things with him, with how he's strong and he doesn't really care what's happening. He's just like getting a paycheck or whatever. I don't know why he's working for Magneto. But he has like Magneto has people who are like acolytes basically.
Yes.
Like they are ready to die for him.
Yeah.
Sabretooth is not one of these people.
This definitely feels like a weekend job for Sabretooth.
Yeah.
He's not a lackey, but they just don't ever expand on that.
Yeah.
It's even hard to sometimes decipher whether or not Liv Schreiber in Origins is the same character or not.
Yeah. That was a weird thing to do.
Sometimes it's easier on the brain just to say these are two different characters. They never call him Sabretooth in Origins, so you could get away with it.
Yeah,
they just call him Victor.
Other mutant.
Yeah. We get to the mansion. Well, Wolverine gets to the mansion. So do we, because Wolverine's our
lens.
Yeah, he's our eyes into this crazy world.
Yeah.
Even though he's got a pretty crazy life himself. But everything else is...
He has a crazy life, though, that, like, a human could have.
Yeah,
Like, he's just some tough guy living in some nonsense place in Alberta.
If I just drove around Canada with a bunch of knives, I could just live the same life as Wolverine. Yeah, taking in bar fights. I wouldn't. I'd be crushed into pieces.
But then, he, with this relatively stable human type existence, comes into the mansion, which is where we start having it.
Well, it's weird. Also, the music gets weirder too.
Yeah.
When he's like looking through the basement and like looking at the costumes, it's this like it has like this very like metallic percussion sound going on, and the music gets like any strings that show up are kind of like off a bit. We see the mansion for the first time in the basement, which is a look that stays around until now.
Yeah.
This
it's
whole
a good look.
metallic. Yeah, it's good. It definitely shows you like there's two different worlds. There's the warm, sometimes rusticy nature of the mansion. And
well, it's Westchester. It's just the kind of wealthy, old.
Could be a golf club.
Yeah.
And down in the basement is this just metal, very like military, but also I don't know.
It's cold. It's clinical.
Yes, clinical. That's the answer. Thank you. Hilary's an editor, by the way. And yeah, Wolverine just runs around, freaked out, finds Xavier, who now explains more stuff that we're probably going to laugh. Maybe not me, because I take everything so seriously. But
yeah, they use him I think very intentionally.
Yeah.
To allow us to hear things like Cyclops and Magneto.
Yeah.
And he laughs, so we can laugh, and then we can set it aside so that we don't have to spend the entire time forcing ourselves to accept the craziness.
Right.
We just, right up front, we're like, haha, he thinks it's stupid too, and then we just move on.
We meet our first kitty Pride.
Yes.
Who goes through a wall.
Right
this
through a
one,
wall.
she's a pretty tall.
Is she tall?
She seems tall. I think she seems tall anyways compared to Hugh Jackman. She's tall. She's a very like redheaded girl.
It's like short hair. Right?
Yeah. Runs right through the wall.
Yeah.
Next movie, she'll be younger and shorter.
Yeah. Do they recast her 3 times?
Yeah. We'll have a different kitty in each of the original trilogy movies.
That's crazy. I remember at the time that drove me nuts.
Yeah.
I couldn't accept it.
Yeah.
I just like blew my
Well,
mind.
I mean, we meet Jubilee in this movie, but not by name. We see her because she's got a yellow coat
look. I wish she
and
stuck
hoop earrings. We get a Pyro who gets recast for the second
she calls
movie.
him John.
Yeah. John's, they don't say his last name, but I mean, that's supposed to be the same Pyro that we see in the second movie. I think he was supposed to have a bigger role too, but we also get Iceman, I guess.
Yes,
kind of in this movie.
Solidly get Iceman.
Right, but he doesn't really.
Legitimate character.
He doesn't do too much. If you were an Iceman fan and this was all you ever saw of Iceman, you'd be pretty upset.
Yeah, that's true.
So
remember, there's the scene where he is replaced by Mystique, and they're both like it's him, the real him, and the Mystique him.
Yeah.
Do you think they got the twins?
That's twins. Yeah, that's the twins.
They didn't have to do any CGI.
No.
They just had the twins.
No,
I
they were
love it. Whenever it's Mystique and they show the yellow eyes, most of the time it's like, yeah, we know.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the violin too, in case this is her theme, in case you couldn't tell just from the eyes.
Yeah.
Like, is it? But I don't hear those violins. She had an 8-hour Mystique had an 8-hour costume and makeup thing. Yeah. I think she had a less time, and then they were like, no, we're gonna paint her whole body blue.
Cool.
So yeah.
Just paint her whole body blue.
Yeah. Which it's such a weird.
Are we gonna talk Mystique's design?
We could talk Mystique's design now because it's definitely one that's a choice they made.
It's very different.
Because in the comics she's blue, but she's dressed.
She's like a person.
Yeah.
Who's blue.
Yes.
And wears clothes.
Yes. And this, she's just blue and naked.
A naked lizard person.
Well, lizard's kind of mean.
She has scales.
Yeah, but so did
crocodile
birds.
person.
Birds
snake
have
person.
Birds have scales.
Birds don't have
They're
scales.
their legs.
What?
Okay. Anyway, no, but so they make this decision, and it's weird because Mystique is very much like a hench person in this movie, the same way Sabretooth is. All of Magneto's flunkies almost are hench, wordless henchmen. Mystique gets one line where she says, "People like you are the reason why I was afraid to go to school as a child," and then foot slaps Senator Kelly a lot.
Yeah.
And I mean that's a cool scene and reveal, but it must also just be great, so this is my career for the next however many years.
Yeah.
Just sitting there getting painted.
Rebecca Romaine, right?
Rebecca Romaine, Stamos at the time.
Stamos at the time.
It's an interesting look, and it's one they stick with through all, Jennifer Lawrence has to do it as well.
I wonder if they regret it. Once they ended up delving more into her character.
Yeah.
Being stuck with that really... Yeah. I mean, it's just not an appealing
Well, none
look.
Of the... Magneto's team is very much we've got the Uggos.
Yeah.
And all the X-Men are very pretty and, they look like James Marsden, who looks like a superhero when he's not dressed like one.
Right.
And then you have Toad, with the eating pigeons.
You're right.
And,
well, it's the Brotherhood, right?
Yeah.
It's those guys.
So that makes sense, but it'd probably help Magneto's case a little more. It's no, look at these other pretty mutants. They agree with me too.
They're pretty.
It's not just people getting, yelled at on the streets for being painted blue and naked.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody's yelling at Mystique, they're probably just yelling put some clothes on.
Just is there a reason that she doesn't wear clothes?
I think, do you like the Mystique design?
No.
No.
I don't.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of those things where the first time I saw it, I was this is cool. And then later I'm well, I wish she just kind of looked like Mystique though.
Yeah.
With the white clothes and, you
I
said, dressed like a person.
It's a weird, unnecessary, dramatic change.
Yeah. And you're right, they don't necessarily explain why because Jennifer Lawrence Mystique wears clothes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess no, she doesn't. Never mind.
Well, she doesn't if she's going to do something.
Well, you know what it is? In this movie...
You know what it is?
Well, yes. It's naked Rebecca Romaine.
It's naked Rebecca Romaine.
But in the movie, Mystique's powers create the clothes and everything. But I don't think they don't dissolve the clothes. You know what I mean? She's not wearing clothes, and then when she turns into Wolverine, she's not just Wolverine wearing what Mystique was wearing.
Right, yeah.
So I think I think that's what it is. She's just naked so that she can just look however she's going to look when she transforms.
All right.
That's my Marvel No Prize win for the night. The X-Men tour, which is like one of my favorite scenes in the movie where Wolverine's just getting the tour. Positive in that, like, everything else we've seen beforehand has been pretty bad for everybody. And now we get to a place where things are nice, and they're playing basketball. It's nice because it very quickly tells you this is a place where if you were a mutant, you'd want to be. Like, they don't have to just show scene after scene of, like, also, we have basketball games, and then they have, like, a really cool basketball game.
Right.
It's just very quick. Like, oh, this is just a nice place for...
It's safe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it, too. It's safe, and they're using their powers openly, and Xavier's talking about anonymity being their main defense, which is a good summary of, like, why they're hiding and everything, too.
Yeah.
But it also, like, very quickly explains, like, the X-Men as a concept. Like, yep, we have a jet. We have things we probably shouldn't have.
And a school.
We're a superhero team. Yes, and then there's a school above.
Part where they finally bring the jet out and the basketball
rolls into
the hangar. I love that part.
I think that basketball's CGI.
Really?
I could be wrong, but I remember listening in a commentary that it might be CGI.
That's such a great moment.
Yeah.
I mean, they do such a good job of juxtaposing those two worlds.
Yeah.
The safe, calm school.
I was thinking about that this time for the first time, that like as the jets are going off, the students are getting out of their beds and looking out the window, and like we're off going to see their adventure, but like the students just see the jet leave, and then they might see the jet come back, and like they just won't have any clue who got stabbed, who got killed.
Maybe they don't even know that. Maybe they just know that the jet leaves and comes back, and they just think it's like a business trip or something.
Yeah. Well, he says the students call them X-Men. The students.
So they must have some awareness.
Yeah, but it's just one of those things that, like, when you think about it from the students, like, oh, all right, well, they'll be back in a few hours, and then they just go off and live their own life.
Probably all of them.
Yeah, I know, right? But we also see Magneto's, like, cave base with the little clicky clacks. The metal balls just going back and forth, knocking into each other, which on VHS it was a little hard to tell. But once you realize that there's nothing attached to them.
That's just him.
That Magneto is just doing that.
It's like he's twiddling his thumbs or something.
Yeah, it's his fidget spinner.
Yeah.
So he's just sitting in his chair, he's keeping them in a straight line and just knacking them. It's almost like just a stress exercise or something.
While he's talking, while he's dealing with all these like heavy planning issues, it's another little tiny thing that shows so much about his character, because it shows the depth and like intricacies of his power and his intellect.
Yeah. Well, because him and Xavier have been around so long, like, he just knows how to use his powers.
Right.
So as somebody else was like, oh, I can't control my eyes. Like, he's just like, yeah, I can talk to this big, dumb grizzly bear man and also do this.
Like, it's just a part of his body.
And then when he leaves, they just fall to the ground. But it's also very subtle. It's not like in the 90s where it would have been just on the screen like, look, it's nothing.
And it zooms
like,
in at the end of the scene.
You're realizing that, unless you're looking for it and hearing it. But I like his Magneto's small uses of powers. This and the second movie do that a lot. Whereas the third movie starts bringing on the, like, let's see how big of a thing Magneto can pick up and then drop. Yeah. But in the first two movies, it's very much like, we see it again when he's going to he's going to meet Senator Kelly and he's building a metal bridge as he's walking.
Yeah, that's really cool.
But it also kind of, like, shows, like, he thinks pretty highly of himself, too.
Yeah, he's got attitude.
Yeah, it's basically him bringing out the red carpet for himself.
Yeah.
But
he's a showman.
Yeah, yes, he is. And that's I think that's a very cool, like, showy use of it. A lot of his powers, it's not just, like, small and, like, budget restraint. It's just very much, like, look how cool metal powers are.
Well, it's not so much how cool,
No, they're cool.
He wants to be, like, his intention.
Yeah.
He wants to be in control. It goes back to his whole backstory. He wants to be in control, and he wants everyone in the room to know that he's in control, and he's going to show them however he can. Yeah. He's going to show them with the big gestures. He's going to show them with the tiny, I can control the most minute aspect of the situation.
And we also get to see Cerebro, like, for the first time, which is nice. In the cartoon, it was just kind of like his head glowed, and then we'd be at a different location talking. But in this is the first time. I think that was the same way in the comics, but this is like the first time it's a big showy thing that they use.
It's a cool design.
They keep using that too, which is nice. And Cerebro to me feels like
every time you say Cerebro, I want to say
Magneto from the Rift Tracks. Magneto, Cerebro.
Magneto.
Cerebro's it's very much like a kind of a goofy comic booky thing to have in something you're trying to take a little bit seriously.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's just a helmet Patrick Stewart wears that makes his psychic powers even stronger.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for one thing. But, it's once you bring in something like Cerebro, you're just like, things are probably going to get even weirder than this. Because you can explain the powers, but once you start explaining, like, the different technology... But it just kind of struck me this rewatch. I was like, Cerebro is kind of a weird thing just to throw at people.
Yeah, I'd be interested. I didn't watch it with people who, like, didn't know anything about X-Men. It'd be interesting to know how a complete unfamiliar person felt about this entire movie. Because
a weirdo is what you're describing.
A crazy person.
Yeah.
It seems to me that all of these things are done artfully and very well.
Well, that's the thing. Like I say, it's a weird, very comic booky device to bring in.
Yeah, I think the sci-fi thing keeps coming up, and I think that plays a lot, like a very substantial role in the success of the movie. That it has such a heavy sci-fi vibe to it, because that just makes the tone really work well.
Yeah.
It settles the viewer really well in like what kinds of things to expect.
Yeah, if you're accepting that this is going to be a superhero movie akin to a traditional sci-fi, then it helps with that also, like, this is the real world now, and you can go big, like you can someday introduce the Sentinels. Yeah. Because they're robots, and robots are in science fiction. Yeah. Which I think helps. It felt, when I was watching the scene with Rogue and Wolverine on the train, just talking about, like, joining...
After Rogue runs away.
Rogue runs away because she had to use her powers on Wolverine, who stabbed her by accident. Yeah. Because...
It's such a teenager reaction, too. Because, like, he stabs her, and she steals his powers to heal herself. Yeah. And then... some random kid is like, oh, they're so mad at you. Yeah. And she runs away.
Well, she's a teenager. Yeah.
That they would be this furious with her for saving her life.
Yeah.
I mean, which is good because she is a teenager,
But like her and him on the train talking about the X-Men, talking about going back and giving those nerds another chance and everything. It struck me that, like, and this had struck me before, but it feels so much like a pilot of a TV show. In its structure or in its dialogue. And I mean, the whole movie you could almost say is just a pilot for future X-Men movies. Yeah. But it's done in a way that, like, as a pilot, it just makes me want more of this on the regular, like this. I just want to see these characters in this world.
You want a TV show.
Yeah, with high production values of $75 million a episode.
So, like, you want a TV show from now.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But... even when I read the novelization in it, I was like, I want more books like this, because, like, this is such a different take. And I think the X-Men, more so than a lot of other Marvel characters, are very malleable in being reinterpreted and having different versions, and which is why I don't get upset now when people are like, oh, that's not how the Phoenix Saga worked. I'm like, I don't care. Like, every time a different animated series deals with it, every time we see alternate realities, I think the X-Men fit in that, which is why, like, I love these movies so much, and it's just too bad that, like, because of the way movies are, like, this feels like a pilot, but a pilot for the next episode is in 3 years. Yeah. And then 3 years after that.
Well, that's part of another thing that makes the X-Men the X-Men. Yeah. The fact that it's such a social...
That's the thing. There's just so many characters. Yeah. That it's frustrating. You can only see them in certain movies, which is why so many... big characters get sidelined for just, like, they just become a stand-in for powers and they disappear because, you know, audiences can only remember in movies, I would say, like, so many characters. Yeah. So in the future when, like, an important character to comic book fans is there, you're like, I want more of that character, but we can't get it because we have to focus on Hugh Jackman and Halle Berry and
You have to focus on them. Right. To a greater extent, right. I think, than you do a lot of other...
The show where we can just see them all the time. The police show up at the train station. Oh, yeah. Which is more Magneto showing off his his powers,
Yep.
dropping cars and
He lifts the cars
bullet
and drops
thing,
them.
using the bullet effect of a spinning bullet going into a guy who looks like Nicolas Cage's forehead. That's another just like, look, he can hold a bullet while letting the bullet spin as it was just shot out of a gun and just also slowly. It's just that's such a cool, memorable scene, and it's such an escalation of Magneto because he's like, Xavier shows up to try to stop him and rescue Rogue. And Magneto's like, or I could just shoot all these people with their own guns. And Xavier's like, well, I'm still going to do it. He's like, okay, well then I will shoot. And then he does. It's just like Magneto is just showing or reminding Xavier's like, I'll keep going.
Yep.
We've got different lines and boundaries we're going to cross.
Yeah, it shows Magneto's familiarity with Xavier because he knows what buttons to push.
Yeah, and what Xavier won't do or
And
won't,
he
as he says,
guesses
won't make
correctly.
Yeah, he says still unwilling to make sacrifices. So they've also had that conversation before.
It also shows, I mean, escalation is right because we've seen what he was doing before with Senator Kelly and everything, and you could sort of think like he thinks that he's doing good.
Right.
He thinks that he's helping this
Right.
person. You could sort of like think it's that kind of a villain,
Right.
but then it's like, oh no, he'll just shoot you in the face.
Yeah. Because we didn't talk about Magneto has a machine that's going to turn people into mutants, like change their genetic structure and turn them into mutants, which is one of the parts of these movies that I just don't like. I've never liked that
just because
machine.
there's no explaining it.
There's no explaining the machine. It's
Well, that's part of the hazards of presenting it as a sci-fi because
Yeah.
you think you need to explain it.
if the character of Forge, who in the comics can invent anything, was one of Magneto's flunkies, then you'd have a pretty person and a
That'd be
reason for the
perfect.
machine.
Honestly, why didn't they do that?
I don't
It would've
know.
been so easy.
And he's never been in the movies, so they weren't waiting to use him.
Yeah.
But also, it's just one of those things where it's like, well, if you could make this, and who made this for you, why don't you just make it again?
Well, I mean,
And-
there's something to that because we know that he helped Xavier build
Yeah.
Cerebro. So, like,
Right.
there's sort of a loose understanding that he has some technical ability. And maybe it's with, like, his magnetism somehow he can manipulate.
But it's I guess it's like how I said at the beginning that like mutation is their piece of magic in this film.
Yeah.
This is like a secondary piece of magic, I
Right.
guess. And it's just one of these like big extra things that's almost too far out. The movie's been trying to be a little bit more grounded.
Right.
And like the plan I get, like the leaders will now be mutants and everything. But Kelly dies from using this machine, so like Magneto didn't test it enough apparently, which seems
He
like
doesn't follow the scientific method.
I guess not. And
honestly, as grounded as Magneto plays it.
yeah, I wonder when Senator Kelly's like he's turning into water.
Yeah.
And then he like splashes down and just goes everywhere all
Yeah.
over the table. I'm like, is he just that water now?
I know.
Does he?
She's just like, he's dead. He
Yeah.
just runs out.
Because like Sandman in the Spider-Man universe,
Yeah.
he just turns into sand.
And then he comes back together.
Yeah. So is he just like pouring down the drain and being like, what is this hell? And that's where he is for the rest of his life? Just part of the water cycle?
That's terrible.
I
But maybe he likes it. Maybe it's like peaceful.
yeah.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
nirvana.
Yeah, he's experienced it. Thank you, Magneto. The scene where we find out they've messed with they messed with Cerebro, so now it knocks
Right.
out Xavier when
They
he
put
uses
some
it.
weird,
And
dark,
Jean,
swirly stuff in it.
Jean is using it.
Jean?
And then and then
Jean?
Scott sees that and starts yelling Jean. That has become a joke of like, I mean, that's like Cyclops' only lines in the cartoons too.
Yep.
It's just Jean. And I mean, I guess it's nice that they're adhering to tradition with him just being like Jean as he runs down. But I like the scene that comes right before that with Scott, where he's talking to Xavier.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Unconscious Xavier, and he's saying, "You taught me all there was ever worth knowing, and if anything happens, I'll take care of him." Which he doesn't, because in The Last Stand, he was busy doing other movies, so they just wrote him out. But it's at this moment, it's like it's nice to know like he's not a jerk, and we had that scene with him and Wolverine saying like, "Stay away from my girl," and Wolverine's like, I'm a tough guy," and he's like, "Well, I'd have to help you, tough guy." But it's kind of like a warm. Like, we get this window into a warmer Cyclops.
Yeah.
Who, like, the movies don't give a crap about Cyclops.
They sure don't.
But in this one scene,
who else doesn't? Anyone.
Okay. All right. In this one scene, you realize that part of his prickliness is that this is his family and he's going to protect them. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's an important scene of knowing, like, he knows how bad the rest of the world is, but he'll fight for this family.
It's a good vulnerable moment for him. Most of what you see of Cyclops is just kind of this overblown Boy Scout thing, and it's nice to have a moment where he has actual feelings.
Yeah. So this is where the movie for me starts feeling I start feeling like you can tell they were having money issues.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the rescheduling and everything. When they get to the Statue of Liberty to fight Magneto and save Rogue.
Yeah.
It's not so much that the special effects look bad. It's just the superheroics happening in the Statue of Liberty feel pretty small. Yeah. And, I mean, the movie's never a big film, but it almost kind of feels like there's like, I guess we have to be a superhero movie too. It doesn't really feel like a natural progression.
Yeah, that's true.
And the way they just like walk in and then they're taken out one by one, it feels rushed. Mm-hmm. Not that I didn't love it as a kid and all the the scenes of them, Wolverine and Mystique fighting, or I guess Toad doing his kickboxing.
I like Toad. I like Toad in this. I hate Toad.
But as a character, you hate Toad. Poor Toad.
He's gross. He's stupid.
He's not.
He's gross and stupid.
Yeah, he's not bright. Yeah, the kickboxing Toad is probably the way to go, though.
I like him. I think he's fun. I don't like when he spits on Jean's face.
Yeah. Well, that's just...
It's so gross.
It is gross.
It's just like on her face.
It's just very sticky mucus.
Also, I was thinking about this while I was watching it. Mm-hmm. That thing is on her face for like a really long time.
Yeah.
So can she breathe or not?
I don't think so. But maybe she used her powers in a way to create
a lot.
A psychic... Like
yes. Because she has such finesse over her pants.
Not in these movies. Storm gets her... All things blow up when they hit by lightning, including Frog Toad's line.
That was delivered so well.
A little better than it is in this movie.
Slightly better than Halle Berry does.
So yes, this is the scene.
What happens? Do you know what happens
when a toad gets struck by lightning?
The same thing that happens to everything else. Now I maintain that this is not inherently a bad line.
The concept makes sense.
I think it is delivered poorly. I think it's the way it's delivered. Strikes me as a fundamental misunderstanding of the line. I think she doesn't get it when she's saying it.
I don't think anybody could deliver that line though.
Yes, they could. That's one of the Joss Whedon lines.
Yes.
That's one of the Joss Whedon lines. A Joss Whedon character, one of the actors that he drags around with him everywhere could have delivered that line.
I don't know how you could deliver that any better without fundamentally changing the whole thing. I think
it's possible that they put it in place.
Yes, insert better dialogue here.
That didn't work. Like if they had structured the scene differently, it would have played differently.
Like the idea that like when lightning hits anything, bad things happen. Look, I just delivered a better line, and I was that was a better line.
No finesse to it. The funny thing about the line,
Halle Berry would add the finesse.
The funny thing about the line is that the same thing that happens to everything else is such a dud of a response.
Yeah,
that's funny if you deliver it right.
Yeah, that
can be funny.
Yeah, why doesn't she say, "Let's find out"?
Because that's not the same kind of humor. That's just being like,
Look, Joss Whedon has the "Don't shoot, it's me, I'm not Mystique, prove it, you're a dick, okay" line.
Stop delivering these lines so terribly.
I'm just saying he makes up for it with that Wolverine line. Those are the two lines.
I'm just saying, Joss Whedon is a creep.
Yeah.
But he has good lines, and I have faith in that.
That's why he's a successwell creep, I suppose.
He's like an unusually successful, although apparently all successful men are creeps.
Huh. Well, okay, so speaking of creepy men, do you want to talk... I know you want to talk about the women in this movie.
Yes, I do want to talk about the women in
Do we have to include Mystique specifically? Because Mystique, to me, made an impact on the audience.
She did.
In terms of, like, she's cool, she has kung fu moves, she fights Wolverine and just walks away. And, I mean, it's a specific type of pander.
Let me start back a ways.
Okay.
The women...
Did you tell me to back away? Guys, I guess I'm backing away. Yeah, I'll be back.
Back away. We're talking ladies. The women in this movie are nothing.
Whew.
Their backdrop
Uh-huh.
Every single line that any of them delivers is delivered with doe eyes. They're helpless. They're like, I have this power, but I guess I don't know how to use it. I don't know. And Halle Berry is the closest thing we get to someone who has power. And even she, half the time, is very apologetic about it. They bring nothing to the table for charisma.
Yeah.
They bring nothing with power.
Jean is flat and she's boring, and she's just there to be...
They're window dressing.
She's there to be Phoenix later, but she's also just there to show you why Wolverine and Cyclops don't get along.
Yes. She serves the plot of the males.
The problem with Rogue and Jean is that they're like that, and they never really go beyond that, even in the sequels.
It's true.
Storm...
It's like they started them that way, and this is giving them more credit than I think, honestly, is
Sorry,
warranted.
David Hayter.
But it could be that they start them weak so that they can show some progression in their characters. That's possible, but you're right, they never do.
Storm, I feel like, is fixed in the sequel, and in the third one, she's much more of a stronger character.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, the nicest thing I'll probably say about Storm in the third movie. None of the rest get that treatment. When Jean does become Phoenix in the sequels, it's not successful.
It's not successful, and she's just crazy
yes.
and sort of possessed.
So
she's not even really herself.
Storm becomes a stronger character, and the budgets match her powers. But there really isn't an excuse for Jean. There isn't really an excuse for Rogue, who's you've depowered from the comics in such a way that she has no budget in terms of her powers. You just have to do that.
And they never use her powers.
No,
the way I mean,
it's
if you're
never
gonna
in battle.
depower her, I can respect that choice if then you use that reasonably. All they did was use it to have her be a victim of her emotions, basically. If she wanted to touch a boy and it didn't work. Yeah. She wanted to touch her father figure. Oh no! It's just all it does is put her in a weak position, and she never grows to a point where she's using her powers and I'll steal this guy's powers and do this thing or nothing.
With Rogue, you're right. They depowered her, and if these movies were more mutant on mutant battles, I think you could use the depowered Rogue more successfully if you say Rogue is a tactician who runs and yes, I'm going to steal his power and his power and use it. But they never have enough mutants fighting. It's never a full cast of Brotherhood fighting a full cast of X-Men with Rogue there being successful. I mean, Rogue just keeps getting lesser and lesser screen time throughout the movies. Yeah. Jean Grey gets less and less lines. In Days of Future Past, Storm has no lines, even though the original trilogy builds her up. So I think you're right. Outside of Mystique and Storm.
And then you bring it to Mystique, and Mystique has strength, but she's intensely sexualized and animalistic.
Yeah.
So she's...
In the second one, we get a little bit more glimpse of why she is the way she is.
Which is fine.
She says the line about
in this movie,
right, you're right. In this movie,
exploitative.
But with Mystique, it's very much it's a peak. In this movie, she's one level. In the second movie, she's better developed, and she steals the show in some scenes, and we find out that she's pretty crafty and everything. But then in the third one, she's back just to being arm candy, and then she's written out, which is pretty ridiculous. Yeah, you're right. I mean, these movies under the direction of Singer and and the continuing people, these movies have always been. They like Magneto, they like Xavier, and they like Wolverine. Everybody else can take a hike. They're window dressing, man or woman, but then the women get even less screen time. For me, I like Wolverine as he's a defining character, but he doesn't need to be the lead man in the X-Men comics. It's not Wolverine and the X-Men is what it is, but these movies definitely do that.
Yes.
And for me, I like the X-Men as a team and all the different characters. And I guess they just were Hugh Jackman is so successful as this character, and he is, and he deserves all that praise, but they're never able to reel it back.
Yeah.
So it would have been if the Star Wars trilogy was always Han Solo all the time.
Yeah.
But they understood they're going to want to see Luke, and they're going to want to see Leia and all this stuff, and these movies never really learned that. until they just can't use
Yeah.
Wolverine. But then they still,
At some point,
even in
it's just
First
gonna be
Class, they just
fat.
fall back to Magneto and Xavier. And Magneto kind of
Yep.
plays the Wolverine role in First Class. So they just, it's frustrating, especially for X-Men fans, because more so than the Avengers and more so than any other like superhero team, I feel like the X-Men have both strong personality in their female characters, and some of them are just like the strongest. Their mutant powers are just the most powerful.
Well, they have the opportunity when you use the X-Men, you have the opportunity to have an intensely egalitarian presentation,
Right?
and they just don't.
Right, and I feel, and that frustrates me because I know that about the X-Men, but somebody like leaving the movies
They wouldn't know.
wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So sorry, Hilary.
Thanks, Eric.
As the man who cast and wrote
Yes.
Wolverine's part in this
I've been
film,
waiting for the apology.
yes, they said, "Can we have Jean do anything cool?" I said, "No." In fact, make sure she gets beaten by Toad.
Just spits in her face.
Yep. We didn't talk about their costumes. Do you like their costumes?
I think they're fine.
Yeah.
I think at the time I was a little disappointed that they didn't go flashy, but it was the right choice.
It never bothered me the way it seems to bother some people. And some people often still critique, like, look at these. They still thought we couldn't use costumes. Like, well, they were going for... this isn't the MCU. And they weren't...
Exactly.
They hadn't gotten there yet. And movies necessarily... Like, Spider-Man... I remember it being a big deal that Spider-Man's costume looked like Spider-Man's costume. Right. I get what they were doing. They were like, people are going to have a hard time with this. Like, fans are going to be upset, but the general audience might not know why.
The audience would have rejected crazy costumes, and it fits better with the tone of the movie.
But it also, I think it was... I mean, you have two things, I think, to blame if you're really upset about these costumes. Black leather. You have The Matrix to blame for making everybody want to put their characters in black leather. But you also have, like, Batman and Robin, which went so flashy and so gaudy and just so colorful that if you had the X-Men in their yellows and their blues and all their colors, they'd be like, oh, now it's turned into Batman and Robin again. And I've always liked the idea that, like, if they're a team, they're probably going to wear uniforms. Yeah. I hope now that Disney is bought everything in the world that when they reboot the X-Men in the movies, maybe we get the traditional...
Well, now I think we could. At the time, in 2000, it would not have worked.
I think also maybe at a certain point they could have started putting them in costumes.
Yeah.
In the first movie, I don't really care.
No.
Magneto has that, like, good speech with Rogue, where Rogue is like, are you going to kill me? And Magneto's like, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, sis.
Well, I mean, it's another of his,
Yeah.
That speech appears rational.
The line and his delivery are just so good together. That whole... Because he talks about, like, I first saw the Statue of Liberty when I was a child, and America was going to be the land of freedom, of opportunity, and peace. And she's like, why are you going to kill me? He's like, because there is no land of peace. Not here or anywhere else in the world. And that's just another, like, this is Magneto. Good luck convincing him otherwise.
Right.
Then we have, like, a big fight with Sabretooth and Wolverine again.
Yeah, on the crown.
Still trying to confirm that they're... I mean, I guess they make sense to have fight, but it is another one of those, like, poor Sabretooth.
At the very least, it is an opportunity to show off Wolverine's abilities.
I used to think... I mean, I hadn't seen too many great action films at this time, so I used to think this was, like, the coolest fight in the world.
It's so weird. That thing where he goes around the crown or whatever, like
I love
the
it.
spooky thing.
It looks so good.
It does not.
You know,
it looks insane.
That's wire work, and that's another thing you could probably blame on the Matrix if you don't like it. Yeah.
I don't.
It's just more of them like, remember the Matrix? Check this out.
I mean, to be fair, the Matrix was awesome.
Yes, but I always thought it was you can only do so much flashy presentations with a guy who has claws, because it's just a guy fighting with knives. Yeah. So, like, yes, and
so just choreograph a cool knife fight.
Physically, he should cut the crown
and then
piece
fall
and
to
just
his
fall
death.
to his death.
Immediately.
But it's cool. It is flashy. It's cool. You got the fireworks exploding behind him.
Yeah.
None of the powers have been used in an especially flashy way in that big fight area.
Yeah.
And
they do have a lot of the powers being kind of weirdly limited. Like Storm can't
I think it's just a budgetary thing. Like, Storm's lightning comes from an elevator. Jean never uses powers except to hold Toad in the air until she gets spit on. Even Cyclops' powers are not used that much.
Right.
So I think they're just like, look, Wolverine cost us $5 to make. We're gonna figure out some flashy stuff. I don't think that would kill Sabretooth getting thrown off the Statue of Liberty into a boat.
No.
just
I
sinks to
think
the
he's
bottom.
okay.
But maybe because of that character, he's just like, you know what? It's not worth it. I don't care. I'm out of here. Good luck.
I'm gone.
Magneto gave his power to Rogue, who's using his machine to turn everybody into mutants. And they're like, we gotta stop it, but we can't stop the machine, maybe, because it might kill her.
Yeah, that's...
Cyclops can't shoot the machine, because it might...
Can't shoot the machine because the rings are moving.
So he might kill Rogue, and he's like, send me up there and I'll cut the rings, which I don't really understand that whole argument. Like,
No, I don't either.
Well, won't a bunch of pieces of shredded metal and your knife hands also maybe kill
Yeah.
Rogue?
Yeah, it's
But-
not a flawless plan.
Yeah, then he goes up there, and this is something that it took me a while to pick up on, and I think I even had to wait till the commentary to pick up on it, that when the white energy, everything goes out to turn people into mutants, Jean is affected, and that, because when they stop the machine, she's like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. I guess she turned into Robin Williams there for a second, but... You kind of see her like looking off to the side, wondering what just happened. And that's supposed to be, that is now going to affect her powers, which leads to her having stronger powers in the second movie.
See, I don't understand. I did not pick up on that in the slightest.
Yeah.
They specifically said earlier in it that it doesn't affect
It doesn't affect mutants.
So why it would just affect her makes no sense.
I think it's because she's a
They
redhead.
have to do it because A, they don't give her anything in this movie, so her power can be whatever they want it to be later on.
Yeah.
And a big part of her character is that she is developing her power throughout her character growth. It seems to me that she could just be in this movie like, oh, I don't really know how to use my powers, and in the next movie she's like, I'm better at it now.
In the comics, you're right, she's developing her powers, but then the Phoenix thing and the increase of her power does happen suddenly. It's not a natural progression for her getting that.
Is that the one with the like alien thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's more like the alien, like the Phoenix entity is.
Yes, that gets
channeling
explained.
its powers through her, which they could still do.
Yes. Well, you want the alien Firebird
I like
in
the
this
Firebird.
So you think the yellow costumes are too much, but the yellow Firebird, if that was showed down, is like, hey, what's going on, guys?
They could sell that.
Yeah. Well,
They
we'll
could
see.
totally sell
We'll see what
that.
Dark Phoenix does.
Yeah, like they could be unstable.
Listen, I was in the meeting with them, and I
powers.
said we could
Why
explain
did
this
you ruin
successfully.
this
I'm
movie,
sorry.
Eric?
I looked at David Hayter and was like, don't you dare give her powers naturally. You give them through a
You
machine.
are the villain of this movie.
I guess. But they take out Magneto anyway. So, and then everybody's all better, and Wolverine uses his powers, or Rogue's powers, on herself to steal his powers, to heal her, and then all his... There's a shot...
Her hair goes white.
Because of Magneto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not how that works.
No, sorry. But there's a scene, there's a shot where where Rogue is taking his powers, and his ability's gone, so all his wounds are opening.
Yeah, that's weird.
But there's a shot of his face just looking at the camera like, "Ugh!"
Yeah.
But in that one shot, he specifically looks like the way Wolverine is drawn in the comics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, to me anyway, it's his hair. Maybe because they're opening the wounds, he looks older. He looks like how John Byrne drew Wolverine's face.
Oh,
and
that's cool.
it's just like this moment like, there he is!
That's
and
fun.
then he's gone again.
He's gone again.
Just gonna go on his way.
Steals the bike.
Yeah.
Classic.
Doesn't go very far. I think X-Men 2 is just like a few weeks after the first movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So he comes back.
He just goes up to Canada, up to Alkali Lake, and then comes back.
Checks things out a little bit.
And we find out Mystique's still alive because Wolverine stabbed her, but she's fine.
She's fine.
Yeah, she's pretending to be Senator Kelly.
I vividly remember the stab wounds being in a different place on her body.
No, I
Like
think they're
lower.
the same one.
I picture them like lower and like on above her pelvis or something.
No, I
Like
think...
very clearly.
I suppose this is a slight fun fact, but you've already gone to town about her makeup and costume. As it is, her hand is where it is on her body because pieces of her costume are falling off in that scene.
Oh my word.
So that's why her hand is on her chest. So, yeah, Rebecca Romijn did
The
not
mic
have...
isn't picking up my eye roll.
Yeah, it was powerful. The whole room shook. We get the cool plastic prison, which I think is like the first time we've ever seen that concept.
That's pretty cool.
Mark Millar stole that in Ultimate X-Men when he was ending his run. He also put Magneto in a plastic prison and had like a speech like him and Xavier have. And I remember reading.
Yeah, I think I've seen that.
Yeah, and I remember reading that. I'm like, okay, Millar.
That scene, I think, is another really good demonstration.
That whole speech is so good.
It's all very good, but
Yes.
I really, really love the last line that I was going to say Picard, that Xavier,
Tisk tisk.
that Xavier
He is an
has
actor.
as he's going out the door. What does he say? He says,
Magneto says, "I still intend to fight this war."
"Yeah,
Xavier says, and I will always be there, old friend.
Yeah.
Unless I'm blown up.
How he delivers that is fabulous.
Yeah.
Because as I was watching it, I was picturing another acting choice that he might have made. And the entire movie, he's very, like, serene. He's this kind man. And it would have been so easy.
Yeah.
Like, more natural, probably, to deliver that line, sort of sad and like, well, I'll always be there. But he has some edge in that delivery, and it's great.
Yeah. Congratulations, Patrick.
Good job, Patrick. I don't know if anybody's ever told you, Patrick Stewart, but you're a pretty good actor.
I mean, it sets up the sequel for the whole mansion invasion in X-Men 2. But it's also just this whole, like, does it ever wake you in the middle of the night that they'll come for you and your children? And Xavier's like, it does indeed. So you know, like, Xavier's still worried.
Yeah,
and then
he's not delusional.
Yeah.
He's just making a conscious choice.
And then he's like, what do you do when that comes to you? He's like, I feel a great soul of pity for the poor soul who comes to that school looking for trouble. And it's just like, that's especially because Mystique had just gone there and caused trouble. And in the sequel, we see what happens when a bunch of people go to a house full of mutants and try to cause some trouble. And in the lead up, that's in the trailers, a lot of those lines. They try to use that line again in Apocalypse, and I'll defend Apocalypse more than most, but that's a bad callback, and it's handled poorly.
Yeah.
Maybe we hadn't really seen, like, we have Xavier tell Cyclops to fix this or finish it when Cyclops and Wolverine's fighting. He's like, cut it out, the two of you. Dad's going to work. But yeah, this is one of those things, like, he's been very patient with Magneto. He's like, fine, Steel Rogue. I'll keep looking for hope. And he reminds him of that because Magneto's like, why do you come here? Why do you do these visits? He's like, why do you ask questions? And you know he's still coming there to help Magneto. But yeah, you're right. That whole, like, I'll be there. Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, he steps to him.
Yeah. We talked about it, but this movie is obvious, like, this started... Spider-Man solidified the superhero, like, movies as being the big budget. Yeah. Everybody needs to make these movies because they make tons of money. Though they don't always. But it definitely, like, made studios start just, like, green-lighting projects left and right. Just
it was...
buying
I
up
remember
rights.
the time when it was, like, nobody's going to make a superhero movie. Yeah. Like, superheroes are silly and, like, outrageous. We're not going to make... a movie. We're not going to, like, spend money on this. On, like, a serious superhero movie. Right. And then X-Men. And then Spider-Man. And now the MCU.
Right. The speed it takes to, like, greenlight a picture and then make the movie. Like, you can say Spider-Man did all this, but, like, Daredevil and Hulk came out 3 years after the first X-Men.
Daredevil is a terrible movie. That's all I'll say.
Okay. But they definitely... You could tell that, like, these movies... Like, Daredevil and Hulk have more in common with X-Men 1 than they do with Spider-Man.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, especially, like, Hulk, which is trying to go for this more cerebral science fiction take on a character. Daredevil, a little less so. Yeah. Iron Man gets all this credit for creating the MCU and everything. But, like I said, you don't get to Iron Man without X-Men. Yep. And I guess it bothers me the way you hear a lot of people just talk about the X-Men series in general as a lesser superhero series in movies.
But it's the foundation.
Yeah, it's the foundation, and also they're great. So shut up, other people.
Other people are dumb.
Review of this first movie, then.
I think it's a great movie. I think I have lots of criticisms about, handling of the female character. But on the whole, I think it's a very well done movie. I think it's very well balanced. I think it's very artfully put together. I think that the structure of it, from start to finish, I think cramming all the information and all of the characterization into this small of a movie, I think it's a very well done movie. Yeah. I think it's not just like a good superhero movie. I think it's a very solid movie.
Watching it this time, the whole pilot nature struck me a little bit more. That it is self-contained, but it's also, I mean, it doesn't shy away from the fact it's like, look, this is just stuff we're going to have to deal with in the next movie. Yeah. We're not going to explain, we're just going to tell you Wolverine has a mysterious past, but we cannot get into it right now. Like I said, the third act feels a little, the whole Statue of Liberty stuff feels a little rushed or almost unwanted in some ways, because they're making such like a almost like just a talking picture in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Just like, we're just going to have great conversations. Because all the conversations are just so good. All the
Yeah.
dialogue in these conversations are so good that when they get to the action, it feels like they're just like, okay, we'll make an action movie as well.
Yeah, it's true, but the arc of the movie requires it.
Yes, right.
Like it's not superfluous as a scene in the movie.
Right.
Like they've set the bar high
Yeah.
with the kinds of things that the audience is going to be interested in, like the dialogue and all of the discussions that they have. So when you get to the action, it is sort of like okay, whatever, I guess we can watch this.
Right.
But if it wasn't there, it would be a lopsided film.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I watched it like as many times as I could as a kid, and I watched it a bunch of times leading up to this second movie.
Yeah.
We had the tape, or at least the DVD, and then I bought the 1.5 DVD that came out, because the first DVD had no special features. 1.5 had so much, and I watched those special features like nonstop, on repeat. They had a history of the X-Men comics, they had a history of making the movie, they had commentaries. It was just like, I just ate it all up. Like, the first act is like almost how I understood the X-Men for a long time, and sometimes how I want maybe an X-Men show or movie to go sometime.
Yeah.
Just with like, it's so amazing to me how they, like, I was there watching it, and I was young, so I didn't really like pick up on like, oh, this is a big deal. And I was just getting into X-Men comics. I remember coming out complaining about like superfluous stuff, because I thought, oh, if I'm a fan, I should complain about stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy to think how much they get right and how much they could have gotten wrong. Even just talking about like who they almost cast sometimes.
Yeah.
Or, you know, like this movie could have just been Wolverine and Jubilee hanging out in New York City. It's crazy how much they get right. It's crazy how much foundation this one movie leads for like its own, like, you know, the MCU is its own superhero universe. Like the X-Men movies are their own superhero universe that this one movie like did.
Yeah.
And in one movie in an hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And like Avengers was like 2.5 hours introducing characters we had already met in other movies.
That's true.
And X-Men is just like, all right, here's a bunch of people, they're fighting, all right, see you next movie. It takes it so seriously, which it hones in on the whole mutants being feared and hated, and so successfully. And while I think the second movie for me becomes like the perfect X-Men movie in a lot of ways.
Oh, we're gonna have a talk.
That's all right. I mean, it's just like, some people like to, when they rank the movies, I always see like the X-Men movie, the first one, like get lowered because because it's lower budget. It's not this big super heroic epic.
Yeah.
But
I guess it depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, but for me, it doesn't belong there. You know, it's fantastic, and I think we can take it seriously, and it doesn't have to be some like Art Deco, some faux 1950s fake city like the Tim Burton Batman movie. You know, this can be real. It can be in New York.
Yeah.
It can be with real people, but you can still have all the superhero stuff.
Yep.
So I love it. Well, that's the first X-Men movie.
Yeah.
That we talked about. So
And it was great.
we will return in a few weeks with X-Men 2.
A few weeks with X-Men 2. Next
Or
week
X2.
we're gonna do
X-Men United.
X-Men United.
That's the full title. I said
Of
X-Men
X2.
2, but it's not.
What are we doing next week?
Pride of the X-Men.
Oh crap.
Yep, next week is our first episode TV show.
What if I
thing.
watch it and love it?
Be a fun conversation, I guess. I looked it up. I really thought it was 40 minutes. It's only like 22 minutes long.
Oh,
It
yeah,
really
it's
is just
just
a cartoon pilot. So.
I watched it on like Napster or something crazy when I was
Really?
younger.
I watched it on like VHS or something. But it's on YouTube right now. All 22 minutes.
Easy
So
peasy.
that's how we're watching it this time. So next week we are talking X-Men or X-Men? It's just called Pride of the
It's
X-Men.
called Pride of the X-Men.
Yeah.
Pryde.
Yeah, Kitty Pryde.
Yes. Because apparently she's critical.
So we're talking Pride of the X-Men, and then once we finish Pride of the X-Men, we'll get into the X-Men animated series 90s edition.
Yeah.
That's a stupid way to introduce the 90s animated series.
Woohoo!
Yeah, if you have any thoughts or opinions about what we just talked about, the X-Men movie, the first
Yeah,
one specifically, or any thoughts and opinions about Pride of the X-Men, which we're talking about, the 80s failed pilot.
Australian accent, yay or nay?
You're asking them. I thought you were putting me on the spot. You can
The correct answer is nay.
Nah. You can let us know on our forum at radiomeanwhile.com, or you can share those thoughts and opinions with us on Facebook and Twitter at Previously on X. And again, if you could please rate and subscribe and share this show on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, that would help. After that, we're also doing our character spotlight, which I believe Hilary is taking the lead of.
It's going to be Scarlet Witch.
We're talking Scarlet Witch. You have decided.
I have decided.
And again, I'm Eric Mickle. You can find me online as Dust vs. Tweak anywhere on YouTube.
Did you say your last name wrong?
I stopped saying my last name.
You said Eric Mickle.
Yeah. Boy, it is later than I thought it was going to be. Dust vs. Tweak anywhere on YouTube, on Twitch, on Twitter, most places. I've probably forgotten where I put Dust vs. Tweak.
Live journal.
Yeah. And then we will see you next week for Pride of the X-Men. So thanks for listening.
Prepare yourself for Hilary complaining.
Oh, boy.